Hi, my name's Ariana, and this is my story about what it's like to have your life turned upside down by some vicious rumors. I'm a bit of a social butterfly, and I love nothing more than making friends with people. I like to be the life and soul of every party, and I've got quite the following on social media, like thousands of followers. One day, I posted a video of me and my dog where I was showing him how to do these cool tricks, and the next moment, some guy from college had DM'd me with a smiley face emoji. Pretty soon, we started chatting, and it was really cool. His name was Daniel, and from the look of his pics, he was super tall and quite famous around our college. He also had so many friends, it seemed, and he was studying medicine. Not only handsome, but smart too. My kind of guy. But then we met up at college one day, and I realized I wasn't that attracted to him. In fact, I wanted to be just friends with him. He also felt the same, and for those who think it's wrong to be friends with the opposite sex, we're both happy with being in the friend zone. After every class, he'd be waiting for me, and we started eating lunch together every day. Everyone stared at us, and I even saw one girl taking photos of us. Clearly, she was jealous. He was like the most popular guy in our year. Very quickly, our friendship got really close, and we hugged a lot and even held hands. Not like in a boyfriend-girlfriend kind of way, just friends. But people obviously got the wrong idea. Well, that girl who'd taken photos of us started posting about it on Facebook, spreading rumors that I was using him to get more likes on social media. I mean, come on! As if I do that! I didn't need to use Daniel to get more likes. I was already super popular. And I don't mean to brag, but I'm pretty good looking, and I'm also smart. So it kind of broke my heart that people would believe what this girl was saying. The day after she'd posted this rumor, I was in a psychology lecture, and my professor asked me to stay behind after class. Then she told me to stop dating this Daniel guy before I tainted my reputation even more, and that if I ever wanted to talk about why I wanted to use someone to gain popularity, that I could give her a call. I couldn't believe it! Even my professors believed these rumors! And for some reason, the next day I decided to ignore him all day, just to see if people would go back to treating me like normal. I felt kind of sad about it. When I came out of my first lecture of the day, he was standing there waiting to go to the canteen and have lunch together as usual, and I just walked straight past him. He called my name, and I could hear confusion and hurt in his voice, and it just made me feel so guilty. Why was I letting these rumors affect me? Was it true? Did I really only care about popularity? And then, things got worse. Later that day, Daniel received an anonymous letter saying, "You deserve better. Ariana is a damn knucklehead, and you should stay away from her." Daniel was so confused and came to show me. At first, I didn't want to speak to him, but he shoved the letter in my face and asked what it was about. I told him I had no idea, and then he looked at his phone, and there were tons of comments on one of the photos of us he posted. All the comments were saying mean things about me, like, "Who is that girl? We should take her down." I was horrified, and so was Daniel. I burst into tears, and Daniel got the person blocked who had been commenting. I started receiving anonymous calls, and there was even a letter slipped under the door of my dorm with dirty words on it. I was so scared, but Daniel always stood by my side to make me feel safe, and told me that we had all the right to decide ourselves who to make friends with. I realized he was right, but I was still so nervous about being seriously harmed, so after that, Daniel and I decided to only meet in private and see if the threats stopped. And they did. I couldn't believe it. I definitely lost a lot of followers on Instagram, but at least the threatening comments and letters stopped. But then, one day, Daniel and I shared the research lab at our college to support each other with our project. We had to wait until everyone had left so we could hang out without anyone noticing. When we finished and headed home, it was dark, so we figured no one would see us. And to be honest, I was sick of having to hide our friendship. Suddenly, something wet landed on the back of my head. I touched it to see what it was, and then I almost vomited. It was fish sauce. Daniel turned around and ran to look, but he couldn't see who'd done it. This was going too far now. I was even being attacked. They were doing so much more than just trying to ruin a friendship. They were trying to make my life hell. At first, I just felt pity for whoever was doing it, but then I was angry. My life was being ruined. Daniel then put an angry post on social media telling them to stop and leave us alone. But that just made things worse. made them jealous and hate me even more. They even commented right below his posts with tons of rude words and threats. It was so insane and out of control. All my friends and family are always on my side, telling me to be the bigger person and not care about it, and that what they're doing is illegal. They say I should be braver and use my voice to stand up for what I believe in, which is that there's nothing wrong with being friends with Daniel. I don't want to lose this special friendship, but I don't know. What do you think I should do? Should I speak up and keep our friendship, or should I just give up so that I can live in peace like I did before? Hey, I'm Emily. I'm 14 and something freaky happened to me. It all started during a really bad time in my life. My best friend Annie was in a mood with me. I wasn't doing great at school and my parents were arguing all the time. Being an only child, I felt like I didn't have anyone to talk to and I just felt so lonely. It was a rainy Saturday evening and I could hear my parents arguing downstairs. I wanted a distraction from what was going on in my life, so I turned my One Direction song up and went on my laptop. I sent Annie a message telling her how upset I was and that I missed her. I could see that she'd read the message, but she didn't reply. Fine then. If she wouldn't talk to me, then I'd find someone else who would. I searched teen chat rooms and ended up on this neon-colored homepage. It looked pretty retro, but at that point, I didn't care. I just wanted someone to chat with who didn't hate me. You could either upload a picture of yourself or choose an avatar. I chose an avatar of a cartoon girl with pink hair because I thought she looked cool. I clicked into one of the chat rooms and posted the message, "Hi, I'm Emily. Does anyone want to chat?" "Hey Emily, I'd love to chat. I'm Hayden." This boy with a spiky-haired cartoon avatar replied. He invited me to a private chat and we started talking. He told me that he was 16, he was really into superhero films, and that he didn't like school very much. We instantly got on, and I found myself telling him all about my life. He was supportive and told me that his parents argued a lot too. Talking to Hayden made me feel like I wasn't alone. I chatted with Hayden every night that week. Talking to him made me forget about my other problems. It was like I was in a bubble away from everything. There were a few odd things about Hayden that, at the time, I chose not to take much notice of. The first one was that he wouldn't talk on camera. His reason for this was that he'd bust his camera after he dropped his phone. He had sent me a couple of pictures and I sent him some back, so I told myself that he must be legit. Another odd thing was that the only emoji he ever used was the basic smiley face one. My mom only ever used the smiley face one too because she wasn't sure what the rest meant. I shrugged this off and told myself that he must just really like the smiley face emoji. I continued to talk to Hayden and I felt myself falling for him. My school and home life were terrible, but he gave me an escape. When he suggested that we meet up in person, I said yes. Hayden lived a few towns away from me, so that weekend, I told my parents I was going to Annie's, as they had no idea we'd fallen out. Instead, I took the bus to meet Hayden. No one knew where I really was or who I was meeting. He wanted to meet up at his house, but I refused to do this. I didn't want to show up on his doorstep and have to talk to his parents. He gave me the address of a coffee shop and told me to wait outside. I stood there shivering with nerves. What if he didn't like me? What if he stood me up? A man older than my dad came round the corner and smiled at me. At first, I just thought he was being polite, so I smiled back. He walked over to me and I thought he was going to ask me for the time or something. "Hi, Emily. I'm Hayden's dad. Hayden's at home and told me to come and get you," he said. I didn't understand why Hayden had sent his dad to come meet me. Something didn't feel right. I asked him why Hayden wasn't here, and he said that he was setting up a surprise for me at home. I wasn't sure what to do. I had suspicions that this wasn't right, but I was so desperate to meet Hayden. I told this man that I'd come with him. I just needed to use the bathroom in the coffee shop first. When I said this, his expression changed. He told me that he only lived around the corner so I could use his bathroom. I said that I'd only be a minute and started walking towards the coffee shop door. He grabbed my arm and started dragging me up the street. I shouted that he was hurting me and to let go, but he only pulled harder. A man was walking past and asked me if I was okay. Hayden's dad smiled at him and said, "Yes, everything's fine. My daughter's just acting up. You know how it is." Daughter? I wasn't his daughter. I screamed out that I'd never met this man before and he wouldn't let go of me. The man told Hayden's dad to let go of me right now. Hayden's dad hesitated before he shoved me onto the ground and then hurried off. The man helped me up and took me into the coffee shop. I called my parents and told them what happened and where I was. When I saw my mom walk into the coffee shop, I burst into tears as I was so relieved to see her. She hugged me and told me that it would all be okay and that I was safe now. My dad called the police and they found and arrested the man claiming to be Hayden's dad. Turns out that it was him I'd been talking to all along. He was Hayden. He'd just been posing as a teenage boy to lure me in. I explained to my parents how lonely I felt and how I hated them arguing. They apologized and admitted that things needed to change. They're getting couples counseling, and the arguing isn't as bad as it was. Annie still isn't talking to me, but I've made a new friend called Gita. As for chat rooms, I can safely say that I am off them for life. Thanks for listening to my story, guys. I know that I was lucky, as if that man hadn't helped me, I would have ended up in that creepy guy's house, and anything could have happened to me. I felt so lonely and isolated that I put myself in a dangerous situation that could have ended far worse than it did. Now I have a lesson from my mistake. You should never meet a stranger alone, as they could be anyone.
Hello, I'm George, and to say I've lived a bit of a unique life so far would be an understatement. Sometimes it feels like my life is something straight out of a mystery detective novel. I'm not really like other teenagers. For one, I've never been to school. My mom died when I was just a little boy, and so it's always just been me and my dad. He's an archaeologist, so for as long as I can remember, we've been traveling and exploring, and so school for me has always been something I've done on the road. I could honestly tell you more about the ancient world than any book could. And because of my dad's obsession with Egypt and the pyramids, I know a lot too. My dad taught me everything I know, and watching him speak to me about his love and passion for the pyramids was so infectious. It was inevitable that I'd fall in love with them too. There was one particular pyramid that he was drawn to. No one had ever been inside the tomb deep within it, but my dad talked about it all the time. He said that if he could get inside, he'd become the world's most famous archaeologist. But there was just one problem. The pyramid contained a curse, and across the door there was a sign that said, "Death shall fall upon all those who dare to enter this sacred space where the prince doth lie." But that didn't stop my dad. He wouldn't give up. He continued to bury his nose in every book he could find about ancient Egyptian codes and scripts. It just worried me, though. What if the curse was real? I didn't want my dad to die. Shortly after my 16th birthday, we flew to Egypt. He said the time had come and that it was now or never. I told him I was coming with him, but he wouldn't let me. He said that I was too young and that the air in the pyramid was too toxic for my young lungs to handle. That was the first time we had a proper fight. I wasn't about to let him go in there and die on his own. It was pointless arguing, though. He just kept saying no to me. We ended up staying in Egypt for weeks. I was starting to miss home and wondered if we'd ever go back. Then one day, Dad said he almost cracked the code. He asked if I'd mind staying just a few days more. Sure, I thought, but deep down, I was worried. He was starting to act a bit crazy. The next day, I decided to follow him. I didn't even know if what he was doing was legal. I kept at a safe distance from him and then watched as he crawled through a small opening at the back of the pyramid. I waited about 5 minutes, then followed him in. I can hear that he wasn't that far away from me. His voice was echoing all through the tunnel, and he sounded like an insane person. He was muttering to himself, and occasionally, he'd burst out laughing. Then as I got closer to him, I heard him speaking to someone. I thought he was in there alone. So, who was he speaking to? Well, guess what? He was talking to voices in his head. He'd officially lost the plot. I thought about calling my grandmother back home and telling her, but she'd only worry. Honestly, my dad was acting like a maniac. He'd devoted his whole life to cracking this code, and so much so that he'd almost forgotten about me. Don't get me wrong, he was a great dad, but this was taking it too far. I got so distracted listening to him that I stopped looking where I was going, and suddenly, I banged into something. Then I screamed. It was my dad. I'd been caught in the act. I thought he'd start shouting at me, but instead he grabbed me and said, "Look, son, look there. Read the curse. I'm so close." Then he pointed to the curse, and there it was, written above the door for all to see. Death shall fall upon all those who dare to enter the sacred space where the prince doth lie. I stayed in there with him as he worked on the last bit of the code, and he said he thought the next day he'd be able to get inside. But when we got back to the hotel, there was a message for us. My grandma had died that day. Suddenly, my dad broke down into hysterical tears and said the curse had come for him already. Then that night, I got a fever, and he started freaking out, saying it was all because of the curse, and even just touching the entrance to the tomb had obviously sent death our way. He changed our flight, and we flew home the next morning. My fever was so bad they almost didn't let us on the flight, but my dad was so frantic I think they got scared and let us on. My dad really thought I was going to die too. We made it back in time for my grandma's funeral, and my dad had become so crazy, I had to get a psychiatrist to come and visit him at home. Ever since that last trip, he has really lost his mind. And as for me, well, I'm determined to one day help my dad unlock that tomb. I refuse to believe that the curse is real. And what can I say? I guess I have developed a real passion for the ancient world, and I feel I owe it to my dad to discover all these secrets that lie hidden inside the pyramids, just waiting to be uncovered. Do you think I should go back to Egypt and try and break the code? Or should I forget it and move on with my life?
Hi, my name's Haley, and recently I discovered my dad was keeping a big secret from me and my mom, and it seriously shocked me to the very core. My family has always struggled for money. Both my parents come from quite poor backgrounds, but my mom is the kind of person that will work until she passes out. She never grumbles about being tired from working so hard. She just gets on with it. I wish I could say the same about my dad, but he has always been kind of lazy. And to top it off, he recently got fired from his security guard job. He was caught watching movies at work instead of keeping an eye on the building he worked at. And because of watching the movie, he failed to notice two people sneaking into the building and robbing a whole shop. So, yeah, he was fired, and that meant even more pressure from my mom to provide for us. We assumed Dad would go out and get another job straight away, but of course, he had no good references and no one would hire him. It really annoyed me. I always saw ads looking for people to work, even at restaurants. He could have done anything. Washed dishes, stacked grocery store shelves, walked dogs. But no, my dad was lazy and it drove me crazy. After about a month of lying on the couch all day, he started to complain that he had a sore back and maybe it would be better if I went to work after school to help Mom out. Well, I lost it. I started shouting at him, telling him how embarrassing it was that he lay at home all day while Mom worked herself to the bone. We were so broke, I had to actually borrow my friend's books for school. Mom couldn't afford to provide us with rent and food as well as my school stuff. When I told Dad this, he just shrugged his shoulders. But then one day, he overheard Mom crying to one of her friends on the phone about how bad things were, and I think that was the turning point for him. The very next day, he went out and found a job. And when he came home and told us, we were so excited we threw a little party. He started the following day and told us he was working at a food distribution company. I was impressed and, for the first time in ages, felt proud of him. Every night he'd bring home food for us, and he even gave me money to buy new school books. I gave him the biggest hug and felt so touched. Finally, he was supporting us. Suddenly, my dad was bringing me all kinds of things. New sunglasses, a cell phone, designer sneakers. I think he was really trying to make up for how he'd treated me before. And my mom was so happy. She stopped working in the evenings and finally started to relax a bit. She deserved it after all those years of hard work. My friends started to notice that I had new things and asked me about them. I was so proud to say that all these things were bought by my dad, and even told them the name of the company my dad was working for. It all felt a bit too good to be true. And it was. One night, I was over at my friend's for dinner, and her dad asked where my dad was working these days. I told him, and he furrowed his brows. Then he asked if I was sure. I told him I was definitely sure, and then he told me that was weird, because he worked there and he had asked around and no one had ever heard of my dad. I could feel my face turning red. Had my dad been fired again? Had he been lying? I went home and Dad was sitting on the sofa eating a cake. Mom was laughing next to him. I thought about waiting, but I was so embarrassed at what my friend's dad had said, so I asked my dad. And I knew as soon as I did that he had lied to us. He was stuttering and tried to make up an excuse, but I could see right through his lies. And then he confessed everything. That he didn't have a job. He just walked around during the day and stole things from bins. Mom immediately burst out crying, and I just stood there, shocked. I felt disgusted. I quickly took off the watch he'd given me the week before. How could he do this? I started shouting at him, and he said we'd put so much pressure on him, and he didn't know what else to do. I couldn't believe he was blaming us. I asked where he got all this new stuff from, and I said there was no way he was finding sunglasses and things in bins. And then he told us. He said there was a homeless shelter that people often donated stuff to, and that he'd go there early in the morning and rummage through the stuff. He got caught once, he told us, and he said that he pretended he was homeless and they felt sorry for him. So every time he went there, they gave him stuff. I was absolutely horrified. He was even selling stuff he found. That's how he could sometimes give us money. Then my mom asked about all the food, and he said that lots of restaurants have a big box at the back entrance full of leftover food for homeless people. My God! My dad was a complete fraudster. Both Mom and I were so disappointed in him. For days we didn't speak to him, and he just lay on the sofa and sulked. Then, one day, I got up and he was on the computer applying to jobs. He begged us to forgive him. He said he could change, that he could find a real job. I don't know if I believe him. But what else can I do? It's my dad. I just have to hope that he truly can change. Wish us luck.
Hey everyone, I'm Vinny. I'm 17, and for a long time now, I've been the funny guy. You know, the kid who always managed to tell a joke at the right moment, or who turned the unfunniest events into the most comical thing ever. Well, that kid was me. The point is that on paper, my life looked pretty okay. Nice house? Tick. A great sense of humor? Tick. Plenty of friends? Tick. So you're probably wondering what the problem is. Well, it all began when I was a little kid. My parents used to argue all the time, and it was hard for me and my older sister to deal with. She used to build a den for us in her room, and we'd hide out in it until they stopped shouting. My parents eventually split up, and my sister and I stayed with Mom. She remarried a man called Jeff. He has a pretty good job, and now we live in a nice house in a nice area. But I find myself feeling like I don't belong here or anywhere. My dad hasn't shown up since then. He completely disappeared from our lives. My mom was so distracted by her shiny new life that she failed to notice me. I felt like such a burden to her. My unhappy home life made me become a timid kid who barely spoke to anyone, and no one seemed to speak to me either. During my shitty childhood, I felt as though I was invisible. I was the only kid from my entire class who wasn't invited to any birthday parties, and who wasn't chosen to be in any study group or sports team. My teachers never called my name, not even once. I don't blame them. Honestly, who would ever want to be friends with a worthless guy like me? I'm not good looking. I'm not good at anything. Neither studying, nor sports, nothing. It was like I was rejected socially because I didn't belong on this planet. But when I went to high school, I wanted things to be different. I wanted to be alive, you know what I mean? Not just be invisible and unnoticed, but truly alive. But how? Maybe if I made a completely new profile for myself, they wouldn't know how much I used to suck. This all started one day when I walked into class, and being the clumsy oaf that I am, I walked straight into a mass of Christmas decorations. I somehow ended up completely entwined in them, so that I resembled a Christmas tree. All the other kids started laughing, and even the teacher laughed when she walked into the class and saw me. I lifted my arms up and did my best Christmas tree pose, which received the reaction of even more laughter. It was at this moment I realized for the first time that masking myself beneath this funny guy persona could help me get a positive reaction and attention from people, which is 1,000 steps up from invisibility. At first, it was pretty easy to be funny. If someone fell over, I'd make a joke about it. If someone answered in class, I'd find a way to make it funny. If there was an awkward silence, I'd stick my tongue out and people would usually laugh. Kids started hanging out with me. I started getting party invites, and I had some friends. The problem was that keeping up a pretense like this was hard, and the more people began to like this fake version of myself, the more difficult it became to maintain it. I was so afraid that when the laughter died, I'd be left as a worthless kid that everyone hated. This is why I was desperate to keep up my funny guy pretense. I had so many sleepless nights worrying that I'd slip up and make an unfunny joke, or that I'd just stop being funny. My most common searches online were, how do I stay funny? And the top things to do to make people laugh. On the outside, I was the funny guy, but on the inside, I felt very tired and hopeless. I realized the painful truth that people loved the clown, not me. After all, I still had no friend, and back behind the wall, the real me was still left there scared and lonely. I felt like such a fraud, which only made me hate myself even more. I tried to feed my clown with comedy, because I knew how different it would be if they met the real me, but for how long? I was losing myself for nothing. I was so exhausted. The clown I'd made was always on, and when all of his energy went out, the only thing that would change was the laughter. My family, my friends, all of them didn't need me. They didn't even know that I existed. And if one day they found me out, they would probably throw bricks on that gross kid and ask for the clown. I didn't want to be alive anymore. I felt so drained and so alone. One evening when I was home alone, I just couldn't take it anymore. I didn't want to live a lie. I just had no energy left for that. I felt so low and worthless that I honestly believed that everyone would be better off without me. So I raided the medicine cabinet and swallowed a handful of painkillers. Luckily, my sister came home early and found me passed out next to the empty pills bottle and called for an ambulance. I survived, but I wasn't happy about this. I broke down and said that I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't be me. I ended up in a psych ward. They put me on medication, and I spoke to a psychologist. It's a long road to recovery, but I'm improving every day. When I arrived back home, this boy from my school called Hank came to visit me. He was my only visitor, and we hadn't even been friends at school, as he was very quiet and basically invisible. He said that he was so surprised when I suddenly changed from a quiet person to a funny and lively one. He told me that he'd always been able to see through my funny guy persona, and he apologized for not trying to help me, but he was afraid that I'd ridicule him. Thinking about it, I probably wouldn't have been very nice to him back then, as I was so desperate to keep up the pretense. He didn't hide behind a false persona. Instead, he was just him. I admired him for that, and I realized that if he could be true to himself, then so could I. I'm back at school now, and I'm not the funny guy anymore. The other kids don't know how to act around me, and I don't have any of my old friends anymore. But I'm now best friends with Hank, and it turns out he's pretty darn awesome. Thanks for listening to my story, guys. I might not be the smartest, the most popular, or the funniest, but I'm okay with that, because I've learned that it's okay to just be me. It turns out that being the true version of myself is far easier than trying to be someone else. Please like this post and leave a comment if you think that it's okay just being the real you, whatever this may be like.
Hey everyone, I'm Gabby. I'm 18 and I have the most amazing boyfriend called Hayden. He's kind, funny, ridiculously attractive, and he makes me happy. The problem is that although I know how great he is, a series of events happened that left my parents convinced that he was a pervert. I mean, it was not simply just an awkward situation you may be in with your significant other's parents. He somehow had really disastrous meet-the-parents moments. Hayden likes alternative music, and his staple clothing choice is usually a band tee and jeans. My parents are quite old-fashioned. My mom loves Frank Sinatra, and my dad is into his classical music. I guess they're just under the impression that people that choose to listen to loud music are all in a cult or something. Yeah, I know, it's ridiculous. The first time Hayden met my parents, I was a little worried, as I didn't want them to see his banty and misjudge him. It was going well. Hayden had flattered my mom, complimenting her Black Forest Gâteau, and he'd made my dad's day by laughing at one of his lame jokes. Things seemed to go smoothly, and my mom and dad were like, "Okay, son, you almost have our nod of approval, so come on." But that was just until things started to be a disaster. Hayden then even offered to help my mom tidy up. It was as he was placing the plates back in one of the upper cabinets that his banty rose up and the tattoo he had of a lioness on his back was revealed. Right at that moment, my dad dropped all the apple cubes he was holding, and my mom, she dropped her jaw. Oh, for us, it was just a tattoo, but at that moment, I realized that for my parents, it was like a real lion tending to jump straight at them. My poor, naive Hayden had no idea about the storm behind him and didn't know why my parents just smiled, sort of forced, and didn't say a word. After Hayden had left, we sat back in the most serious way ever and really had to talk about a lion who just came through our house and tidied things up. They were both furious that I was dating someone who had abused their body. They were convinced that he was a criminal. I tried telling them that his tattoo was in memory of his late mom, and it held a lot of significance and meaning for him. They didn't listen to me and said that I just made excuses because he made me blind. They were adamant that I wasn't to see him again. Of course, I ignored them. I wasn't going to stop talking to my amazing boyfriend just because he had a tattoo in memory of his mom. I was hoping that things would settle down and they'd see how amazing Hayden was. But one thing led to another. One day, I was listening to music in my room when my mom barged in looking flustered. Apparently, they'd driven past Hayden in town and saw him terrorize some kids. What? Hayden? Terrorize some kids? He is a volunteer at a local orphanage and he loves kids. My mom even said that she saw him push a little boy into a bush. I burst out laughing. The whole thing sounded ridiculous. I rang up Hayden. Turns out, he'd seen a group of kids push this boy into the bush. He chased them off, then helped the boy out of the bush and checked that he was okay. It was totally opposite! But my parents didn't hear me out. You know, if they saw a lion stand by a little deer, so of course the lion must be the hunter and the deer is the prey. If you think that things couldn't get any worse, then trust me, they unbelievably could. My parents banned Hayden from coming over, but we still hung out. One night on our first anniversary, we were out at a restaurant for a romantic dinner with candles and roses. Everything went great, and yes, again, until the last moment. I went to the bathroom, and after I finished using the toilet, my pants zipper got stuck. A handsome boy was waiting for me out there to enjoy a lovely night together, but here I was, walking out of the toilet with an undone zipper and a frown on my face. After hearing me mumble about it, he quickly understood what happened, took off his jacket, and tied it around my waist while trying not to laugh. He took me to an alley nearby, which was dark and empty, so that he could help me pull it up. And all of a sudden, my parents showed up. Like, out of nowhere! I can never forget that moment. I was standing deep in the dark, empty alley, my boyfriend was on one knee trying his best to pull my pants zipper up, and my parents were frozen in shock, with their group of friends pointing at an unknown ridiculous couple. It was mortifying! My dad stormed over to us and shouted at Hayden with all the rude and dirty words he could think of. My parents were both so furious that I was dragged into their car right away. I was grounded for maybe forever, until I got some sense. They confiscated my phone, my laptop, and even my Walkman. Did they think that he could send me a message using radio waves, or what? One day, my dad barged into my room, found me almost bored to death on my bed, then told me that my mom was taken to the hospital and we needed to hurry up. We rushed over to her and found her laying on a hospital bed with a broken ankle and some scratches on her body, and a handsome boy was sitting next to her and taking care of her. He was none other than Hayden, my boyfriend, the rejected lion. My dad jumped in like, "How dare you?" And my mom stopped him like, "Don't be so rude. He saved my life." Both me and my dad had no time to understand the situation as another tattooed guy rushed in, bringing my mom's bag and said, "Oh, madam, are you okay? I caught that damn robber for you. So if your hands are not broken, please check your bag." Of course, her hands were fine. They were grabbing my dad's collar to protect my boy. At this point, everything was clear. She got mugged, and the unlucky robber stole her bag and knocked her off the street. Hayden and his tattooed friend showed up at that moment, and here we were. My parents eventually gave him an opportunity to explain himself. They finally realized that Hayden was a good person, and they're now his biggest fans. They're always inviting him round for dinner and saying nice things about him and about the lioness, too. It only took my mom being mugged for my parents to realize that my boyfriend wasn't a pervert. I'm glad that my mom wasn't seriously hurt and that Hayden found her on time. Even though I don't agree with some of my parents' views, it doesn't change the fact that I love them very much. I'm just glad that they now know how great Hayden is. Thanks for listening to my story, guys. My parents learned their lesson and realized that they should give people a chance before they jump to ludicrous assumptions about them. Please leave a comment if your parents have ever made the wrong judgment about someone too. It'll be great to know that I'm not the only one with mega embarrassing parents.